Wonderful. Thank you so much, Peter. I have to tell you about my experience at the lawnmower shop last week. Went in, picked up my lawnmower, got a hat, small lettering. I could tell it said Trump on it. And I looked a little closer and it said, "Save your rump, vote for Trump." And he gave me the hat. Thank you. That was great, Peter. Thank you so very much. Our next speaker, Congressman Ron DeSantis, special guy. He's a native of Florida, worked his way through law school and through his undergraduate studies, earning his law degree from Harvard. He accepted a commission in the U.S. Navy Judge Advocate Corps. In his capacity as a JAG, Ron served as prosecutor and later legal advisor to the United States Navy SEAL operations in Iraq. This guy's not likely, folks. He was elected as a member of Congress representing Florida's 6th Congressional District in 2012. Congressman DeSantis has served on the Judiciary, Foreign Affairs, and Oversight and Government Reform Committees. Please give a warm Nassau welcome to Ron DeSantis, U.S. Representative.
Thank you for coming out. Great to be here. I'd like to introduce my wife, Casey. Many of you know her. She's been on TV in this area for a long time, so think about definitely the better half of the combo. We were out to dinner a few months back, and when it came time to pay for the bill, I thought I was grabbing my credit card, but I accidentally grabbed my House of Representatives voting card. We get issued a voting card in the House. When the votes come up, you put it in a machine, you press yes, you press no, the vote lights up on the big scoreboard next to your name, so you use this thing a lot. Well, I wasn't thinking, I just put it in there. Well, the server comes back a few minutes later, opens up the bill, looks at the card, sees my mug on it, sees U.S. House of Representatives, and says, "Sir, we don't accept this here. You're $19 trillion in debt." But that's one of the frustrating things in Washington, because if you look, 15 years ago, our debt was about $5.7 trillion. Now it's going to be $20 trillion at the end of 2017. And in my short time in the Congress, I've been steadfast in opposing wasteful spending and opposing additional debt, so much so that Citizens Against Government Waste rated me as the #1 fiscal conservative in the entire country. So I'm happy to be standing up for taxpayers. When I was in Iraq, we were in Fallujah. We had kind of a big tent that housed the operations center where our commando had worked out of. And so if someone were to fire a mortar, it would just go through. But there was one room that was heavily fortified, and that was called the skiff. It's where people would keep the top secret information. That's where it would go. Signals intelligence, humans intelligence, all this other stuff. And let me tell you, if anyone would have taken information that they got out of that skiff and thrown it on a private email or Hotmail account or something like that, they would have been removed from duty, they would have lost their security clearance, they would have probably faced court-martial, very well may have ended up in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And so now we're faced with this prospect where you have a presidential candidate who the first thing she did when she was nominated to be Secretary of State was she set up her own rogue private email server in her house, and she did it for a very specific reason. She didn't want any of you to be able to get her communications through the Freedom of Information Act. She didn't want anyone in the Congress to be able to conduct oversight over her activities and to hold her accountable. So she chose to protect herself, knowing that she was risking the integrity of her communications and, by extension, our national security. I don't know what the Justice Department's going to do. I'm not holding my breath that they're going to do the right thing, but let me tell you this. If the Justice Department's not willing to hold her accountable, then it falls to us to hold her accountable by defeating her in November of 2016. The lack of accountability in Washington is one of the biggest problems, and it's not just with people like Hillary. You look at an agency like the IRS. They were targeting Americans based on their political orientation, denying them or delaying their tax-exempt status. This all blew up, and so Congress started investigating. The Justice Department claimed they were investigating, but they weren't going to do anything. They didn't even bring Lois Lerner's case to the grand jury. So it really fell to the Congress to determine what is this powerful agency doing and how are they infringing our freedoms. Well, we subpoena Lois Lerner's emails, not once but twice. What does the IRS do? They destroyed 24,000 of Lois Lerner's emails that were under a subpoena. The commissioner of the IRS has made multiple false statements under oath before congressional committees, and they didn't even do basic due diligence to try to comply with what Congress was asking for. So let me ask you this question as a taxpayer. If you were the subject of an IRS audit, and they summons documents from you, and you destroyed them, if you told them lies about what you had done, or if you just decided, you know what, I'm not going to comply at all, is there anybody here who thinks you'd be able to get away with that as a taxpayer? Of course not. So I think it's unacceptable that we have the head of a very powerful agency operating under a lower standard of acceptable conduct than that standard that he applies to the taxpayers he's charged with auditing. I think it's intolerable. So I was one of a merry band of 3 or 4 members of Congress about 6 or 7 months ago that we said, you know what, this can't stand. We have to use the power that we have to bring accountability. And so we filed articles of impeachment against the IRS commissioner. And I'm happy to tell you, we're now considering it right now in the Congress. And I don't know how people are going to vote on it. I know how I will. You need to tell your member of Congress to get on board with it. But you have to have accountability. Not only do these people need to have a standard equal to what they would impose on the taxpayer, their standard should be higher, not lower. So we got to bring accountability to Washington. I'm working hard to do that. If you look at our national security, we have threats that have gathered. There are more Islamic jihadists operating under a wider berth of territory today than at any time since 9/11. And you honestly may have to go back hundreds of years to find a time in history where Islamic jihadism was on the march the way it is. You're not going to defeat the militant Islamists if you can't even identify them by name. It's not a man-caused disaster. It's not a workplace violence, which they tried to say the Fort Hood terrorist attack was, or even violent extremism. These are people who are motivated by a very specific and deadly ideology. And when I was in the Navy, I spent some time at the terror detention facility in Guantanamo Bay as an officer, not as a detainee. And the one thing that really struck me, they were very honest about their views and their motivations. And they said, look, we are charged. It is our duty to wage war against people who will not submit to our totalitarian ideology. And so you see a group like ISIS that obviously operates under that, but you also have regimes like the one in Iran that operates under the same basic principle. I was one of the leaders in the Congress opposing the Iran deal, which has been proven to be a disaster. But I also, just last week, was the first member to actually pass a measure through the House to challenge the Iran deal. We barred any taxpayer subsidies from going to Iran for the purpose of purchasing heavy water. And that is something where we got bipartisan support for, and it's showing that this deal does not have any support with the American people. We got to keep the pressure on, and the next president needs to stand up, and they need to confront Iran. We need to impose new sanctions. They are running roughshod around the Middle East right now. They're funding terrorism, and they're making the world a much, much more dangerous place. We also have to do something else in the Congress that we've moved it along through one committee, and I hope we can do it on the House floor soon, and that is finally and officially designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a foreign terrorist organization. They are not part of the solution in the Middle East. The Brotherhood is part of the problem in the Middle East. I think if you look at our economy, you see the numbers, hardly any jobs, economy stuck in neutral. For me, the root problem of all of this has been the growth of government, the growth of bureaucracy, the growth of red tape, which is just suffocating people who are trying to make the most of their own lives. And it's almost as if government's not there to protect them. Government's there to put obstacles in their way and make it more difficult for them to succeed. Here's the trick in Washington. Right now, if you look around D.C., 6 of the 10 wealthiest counties in our country Our suburbs of Washington, D.C. D.C. is the second fastest growing part of our entire country. Now, why would that be? They're not producing any shale in Washington. They're not doing any finance or technology or anything. It's all because of the growth of government concentrating money, power, and influence inside the Beltway. Those who are politically connected benefit. Those who aren't, like the people in this room, you get left holding the bag in the form of higher taxes. The cronyism that goes on in Washington passes on higher costs to you in the forms of higher health care, higher food prices, higher energy prices, higher education prices. And so that is the trick. Those who are represented in Washington, the special interests, they do very well, and the taxpayer consistently gets left holding the bag. So we as Republicans, we need to take on crony capitalism. We need to get money, power, and influence out of Washington, D.C., put it back where the American people are able to realize their dreams. And I can tell you, as we relieve those burdens, and if we have government get out of the game of picking winners and losers, you will see the economy start to improve and the economy start to boom. And that means millions and millions of Americans will finally have an opportunity to better themselves. You're never going to reform Washington, though, until you do a couple of important things. One of them, and I've not been there a long time, but I can tell you, it's never going to fully change unless you enact term limits for members of Congress. You've got to do it. The other thing we have to do is eliminate perks such as congressional pensions. I declined the pension when I went in because I wanted to lead by example, but I also have the bill to get rid of them for everybody. The American people are not getting 401ks and pension, so you can't give somebody who gets elected a better deal than the taxpayers are getting with their jobs. So to me, that's a no-brainer. And then finally, I have a great amendment which I think that we can get huge bipartisan support for. It's very simple, but I think it's powerful, and it's this. Congress shall make no law applying to the citizens of the United States which does not also apply to the Congress itself. So of all the damage that we've seen done over the last 7.5 years, I think the most lasting damage has probably been the damage to our Constitution, our system of government, and the rule of law. You know, when I was in the Navy, I commissioned, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution. Get to the Congress, it's the same thing. And it's somewhat curious because if you are joining the Chinese military or serving in the Chinese government, the oath would be to support and defend the Communist Party of China. If you were in a monarchy, you would take an oath to support and defend the king or the queen. But here in America, we're taking an oath to this document because the document really represents the fundamental principles that make the country unique. And the Founding Fathers understood this. When they created the Constitution, they studied the history of every republic and the history of mankind, and they tried to draw lessons from each example. They noticed that every single republic that had ever been attempted, all of them had one thing in common, and it was this. Every one of them had failed. And so they believed it fell to America to determine once and for all whether people really could govern themselves, whether you could have a society based on the protection of our God-given liberties, the rule of law, or whether mankind was forever destined to live under various forms of despotism. And the Constitution was their answer to this historical dilemma, because they understood you didn't want too much power in one branch of government. You wanted to make sure that the different branches could check each other. That is the best safeguard for individual liberty. And so when we have a president now who comes before the Congress and says, Congress, do what I want, but if you don't, I'm going to do it on my own. It's not just that he's enacting bad policies through executive action, and he is, and I fought all of those policies, but it's really undermining the fabric of our constitutional system. The more we move away from a government based on the rule of law and toward one based on the rule of man, I think the Founding Fathers to a man would have said, you're gambling with your liberties, you're gambling with your freedom, because that is ultimately our best protection. And the reason is, and Lincoln said it best when he spoke to the Ohio Regiment at the end of the Civil War, he said, a free government gives every American an open field and a fair chance for their intelligence, enterprise, and industry to flourish. He said that is an inestimable jewel in human history, and it's something that's worth fighting for. So I'm running for the U.S. Senate because I think in 2016, we have to not only do things like balance the budget, repeal Obamacare, get our national defense in order, but we have to restore the foundations of our country, the limited government principles that really make us unique. And I'm motivated to do it because I want a better life for us, our kids, and our grandkids. But I also have another motivation, and Memorial Day reminds us about this, but when you go to Washington, you go on the National Mall, you can see all the monuments, the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, Martin Luther King, Thomas Jefferson, you see the White House, the Capitol Building, all within a mile of each other. And it's a pretty cool sight because it makes you feel good as an American, because that really stands for a lot of key principles that make our country a great country. But let me suggest to you, you go and you want to find the best monuments our country has to offer, you're not going to find them on the National Mall. If you want to find the best monuments the country has to offer, you're going to have to go across the river into Virginia, to a town called Arlington. You're not going to see big monuments. You're going to see a lot of small white headstones at Arlington National Cemetery. And the thing about it is, you can have the best principles in the world, you can have the best ideas in the world, you can have great political leaders. But if you don't have people who are willing to stand up, risk their lives, and in some cases give that last full measure of devotion to a cause greater than themselves, then those principles aren't going to amount to very much. So as we gird for battle in 2016, let's do this because we want to make the country better. We want a better life for us, our kids, and our grandkids. But let's also remember those who sacrificed in the past. Because if we don't get this right, then we're not really doing justice to their memory. So thank you all. God bless you. You guys have a great day.